There are two types of men that I see. There are the men who are used to making excuses for other men. And then there are the men who try to do better than them. The men who are used to making excuses for other men, I think very often they are men who have had a very early life experience with a man that has let them down in some way or has disappointed them, whether that is an absentee father, whether that is someone who bullied them in childhood. They have obviously had a very early introduction into the flaws of human beings, and seeing other men as flawed, imperfect individuals is probably a good thing. So these are the men who will call themselves realists, and they will look at the state of the world, they will look at politics, and they will see men like Trump, and they will understand that he is an imperfect being. They will see his flaws, they will see his failings. They will look at someone like Trump and they will make excuses for him. They will justify the things that Trump says and does as being a means to an end, as though there were a reason or a loftier purpose or a more noble goal behind the shitty behavior, behind things like flouting the rules. And what I don't understand is why it is that I then have to also make excuses for a man who I see as being unfit to do the job that he signed up for. It isn't my job to make excuses for him for what he does and for what he doesn't do. It is, however, my expectation that he, at the very least, upholds the standard requirement of his job, which happens to be the president of the US. And that president of the US is not only an influential figure, the president of the US is able to effect change throughout the world. The actions of the president of the US have repercussions for every other country. So when I look at someone who I don't think is doing a good enough job, what I don't want is to then be berated and encouraged to make excuses for the things that I think this person is not doing right in his job. Who that man is in his personal life, who he is when he goes home to his family, is irrelevant to me. What is relevant to me is how well he is doing his job and the effects that it has on my life when he doesn't do his job the way I think he should be doing it. The men who will not make excuses for Trump, they are the men who will find most of what Trump does unacceptable. They are men who, because they find his practices, his conduct unacceptable, they will very rarely then emulate that. They will very rarely try to be a 2.0 version of Trump, thinking that that's the only way that the game has to be played. That if you want to have power, if you want to be successful, if you want to achieve particular outcomes, you have to take on a posture like Trump's. You have to be someone who will lie to the public, who will play politics like it's a game of poker, who will bluff opportunistically, who will steal for personal gain, who will force others into bankruptcy for the good of the nation, for the good of others, who will basically favor some while punishing others. The men who see this as a flaw and not as strategy, they are usually men who not only do they not see themselves in men like Trump, they will see Trump as falling short of a standard that they have about how men should be and act and behave. So in both instances, you are putting men on a pedestal. So if you don't see someone like Trump as the standard, as a flawed individual, but ultimately the standard, and therefore you excuse anything that's undesirable. If you have a standard and you hold men to this standard, including men like Trump, and you find that someone like Trump falls short of that standard, your standard also very likely is an illusion. It's a fantasy. It is an ideal that has very possibly never actually existed in life. So you may have grown up with someone who you admired, and coming into adulthood or into maturity, that assumption or that idea may have been corrected. You may have then learned later, actually, all human beings are flawed, including the people who I used to put on a pedestal, who I've always admired. They are also capable of doing the wrong thing. They are also capable of making mistakes. They are human after all. They are like false gods, you would say. However, having that as a standard, even something that might seem idealistic, something that you might strive to achieve in your life, being someone who is able to be honest, able to tell the truth, able to live in a way where you don't compromise on your integrity, where you can be honorable, where you can do good in the world, and that achieving something does not have to come with destruction, that you don't have to destroy something in order to achieve success or achieve a goal you've set. If you are someone who still maintains that there is a better way to lead, a better way to live, a better way to show up in the world as the kind of man that you would like to become and that you wish you had growing up, that you wish you had now in the form of a world leader or the president of a country, I don't think it's a hopeful, optimistic, but ultimately futile thing to want. I actually think that either way, if every human is flawed, if every human is ultimately imperfect and will never actually achieve this unrealistic ideal of being perfect or being a good or great or honorable man who always does the right thing and still achieves success both materially but also in terms of morally, who's never had to compromise on their ideals, who's never had to deceive the public. I still think even if you fall short of being all of those things, rather fall short in trying than to sell those things off early. The men who don't make excuses for other men, the men who believe that they can do better than them, they will often, very often, not simply overlook the flaws and the failures of another man. They will simply try to best him and outdo him. The men who find the way Trump conducts himself in world politics and also in domestic politics, the men who find his approach unacceptable, they aren't looking to become a better version of Trump, because the misgivings that they have around things that this man does, for example, outright lying to the public, deceiving people, stealing money, forcing a whole nation to go into debt while he personally gains. These things which people find unacceptable, they will usually not then try to replicate those mistakes by taking on the same idea of how to run a country and how to be in government. I would rather a world full of men who try and fail to achieve an ideal that they believe might one day be possible than someone who, from the very outset, assumes that there is no way to succeed in life without compromising on certain things, without sacrificing on certain things. But the things that you sacrifice, things that you compromise on, are things like honesty, things like integrity, things like the trust and faith that people place in you, that you assume because of the things that have been normalized to you by leaders, that those things at some point in your life you will have to give up in order to achieve greater things. If that is what you believe, you won't be trying to find a way to use your power, your strength, your success to keep those things intact, not for yourself and not for others. What you will end up doing is conceding to a world where the earlier you sell off those things, the earlier you discard things like an obligation to tell the truth, an obligation to be honorable, to act in a way that's honorable, to act in a way that's better for everyone, not just a select few. You will concede to a world where the earlier you sell off those things, the better. When you live in a world where honesty is a disadvantage, and you continue to create a world where dishonesty will always be a disadvantage, you will encourage, even if you don't mean to, you will encourage people to never, ever try to live with honesty. What you will end up creating is a world where those things will be frowned upon and they will be got rid of. They'll be discarded and shed early in life, before anyone has even had to be faced with a choice where they have to decide between honesty or a particular course of action. They'll just get rid of that stuff as early as possible and never once live in a way where honesty and integrity and honor can be part of the way someone lives.